Hey, welcome to Father's Ed. I'm your host, Paul Rhodes, and today we're going to be talking about something that's been sitting in the back of a lot of conversations for a long time now, but has been in the news this week. It's about what happens not just emotionally or personally, but practically, structurally, when a man becomes a father in the UK. Now, if you're someone who's been through that moment, you probably remember how fast life comes at you. Sleepless nights, tiny bottles, figuring out nappies at 3 a.m., and somewhere in the middle of that, work. Because in the UK, most new fathers get 2 weeks. And not just that, but the pay for those 2 weeks is so low, many dads feel they can't afford to take it. This week, we were supposed to get a step forward. The Employment Rights Bill was going to make paternity leave a day one right. But in the fine print, the pay piece, it didn't move. And that's where the frustration comes in. So in today's episode, we're digging into that gap between policy and reality. We'll be joined by Jeremy Davies from the Fatherhood Institute, someone who's been watching this space closely and pushing for change. And we'll go long on context. We'll look at how the UK stacks up to other countries, what we're doing well, what we're missing, and what the data tells us about why this stuff matters. Let's get into it. There's this moment I keep coming back to. You're sitting in the hospital, your partner's holding the baby. You're in awe, you're terrified, you're exhausted, and somewhere in the back of your mind is this creeping thought. How am I going to handle this and work? For a lot of new dads in the UK, that moment isn't just emotional, it's logistical, it's financial, it's policy. And right now, the policy isn't really built for what fatherhood looks like today. In the UK, statutory paternity leave is 2 weeks. That's it. And it's paid at just over £187 per week, or 90% of your earnings, whichever is lower. Which means if you're making an average full-time salary, you're taking a 60 to 70% pay cut just to be with your newborn. That's not a benefit, that's a barrier. And even getting those 2 weeks, that's not automatic. You have to have been with the same employer for 26 weeks by the 15th week before the baby's due date. That's a timeline most people don't even think about until it's too late. Now, the new Employment Rights Bill, that's big news. It allows about 30,000 more dads to access paternity leave from day one of a job. And that's great. But, and this is a sticking point, it doesn't extend pay. So you might technically be eligible to leave, but good luck surviving on £187 a week if you're in a high-cost area or your household relies on your income. Jeremy, who you'll hear from later in the episode, called it what it was, a half measure. It looks good in the press release, but it doesn't change the fundamental maths for families. So how do we stack up globally? The UK's parental leave system remains one of the most unequal in the developed world. The OECD Family Database ranks the UK 40th in an international comparison of countries with earmarked leave for fathers paid at 100% salary equivalent at 0.4 weeks. Sweden offers a total of 480 days parental leave, paid at around 80% of income, with mothers and fathers entitled to half the days each. 90 of those are ring-fenced for each parent and can't be transferred, though you can transfer 45 of them to a grandparent. In Norway, it's the same story. Generous leave, dedicated dad time, high uptake. In Spain, both parents get 16 weeks at full pay. That's not just symbolic, it's structure. And then there's Iceland, with a system characterised by a complete absence of gender-specific leave, with both parents being entitled to 6 months. Now compare that to the UK. 2 weeks at low pay, one of the lowest levels of state support for fathers in the OECD. You start to realise we're not just lagging behind, we're playing a different game. Now what about shared parental leave? Introduced in 2015, it had good intentions. The idea was to give families flexibility, up to 50 weeks of leave to split between parents, with 37 weeks paid. But the structure is so complicated and the pay so low that barely any eligible parents use it. There's no use it or lose it portion ring fence for dads, and because men typically earn more, it often makes financial sense for the mother to take the bulk of the leave. So what's marketed as shared often becomes default maternity leave in practice. It's well-meaning, but in execution, it's just not working. So let me tell you about my own experiences with paternity leave, because in some ways, I've got to live both ends of the spectrum. My son was born at the start of the COVID era, lockdown life. And yeah, technically I had the same 2 weeks as every other dad gets, but what it looked like was different. No visitors, no grandparents holding him, no popping him down the road to introduce to a neighbour, or having a sleepy pint while he snoozed in a pram. It was just us in this weird quiet bubble. The weather was good, thank God for that. But the whole thing felt disconnected from everything we thought new parenthood would be. It was isolating and it wasn't what we'd imagined. Fast forward 3.5 years, and my daughter arrives. This time it's winter, so no sunshine or blossoms, but it's not too cold. More importantly, I was in a different place, mentally and emotionally ready. I was determined to soak in every second of it. I took the statutory 2 weeks again, but thanks to a generous annual leave setup from my employer, I added on another 3. So 5 weeks in total. 5 uninterrupted weeks with my wife, our brand new daughter, and when he wasn't off at nursery, our son. And we were out, like properly out and about. She was 4 days old when we took her to the local coffee shop. We had long lunches, quiet walks around lakes and parks, those low stakes, high impact moments that somehow etch themselves in your memory. And it was amazing. I wouldn't change a thing. Those 5 weeks gave me space to be present, to really meet my daughter, not just see her, to support my wife as she recovered from the pure physical chaos of birth, and to share those early quiet family moments with our son and watch him fall in love with his sister from day one. It felt like what paternity leave is supposed to be. Not an absence from work, but a presence in something bigger. And the thing is, 5 weeks still felt short. So why does it all matter? Because when we talk about paternity leave, we're not just talking about time off. We're talking about equity in the home. Studies show that dads who take leave early are more likely to stay engaged long term, sharing the load, building stronger relationships with their children, and supporting their partner's return to work. Then there's the economic outcomes. A TUC-backed analysis says that extending paternity leave to 6 weeks at 90% of pay will cost about £400 million a year, but generate £2.8 billion in economic return through higher maternal employment and productivity. That's not a cost, it's an investment. And then there's child development. And the research here is rock solid. Kids do better when both parents are involved from the start. Language development, emotional regulation, cognitive skills, they all benefit from early father involvement. And then there's just the human side of it. This is about men who want to be there. Men who are eager to do the feeds, change the nappies, show up to appointments, support their partners, bond with their babies. But the system tells them that's a luxury. You have to earn that. Why should time with your newborn feel like a financial penalty? The blueprint is already out there. We need non-transferable leave for dads. 6 weeks at the same rate as maternity leave. Use it or lose it creates cultural expectation and normalizes dads being at home. A simplified, streamlined shared parental leave system, something that families can actually understand and plan around. And eligibility from day one for both leave and pay. In a gig economy world, in a world where people move jobs frequently or work freelance, the 26-week rule is wildly outdated. And we need to stop talking about this as a family perk. It's infrastructure. It's the foundation of how we build equality at work, at home, and across society. If we're serious about closing gender gaps in pay and career progression, we can't keep pretending that childcare is a women's issue. It's a societal issue. And the sooner we build policy that reflects that, the better off we all are. So next up, we have our interview with Jeremy Davies. Just to flag up front that the audio quality on this isn't the best. Chris was in the process of moving, so his microphone was packed up in a box, and Jeremy joined us from an outhouse that had no door and was next to a church somewhere in Italy. We have managed to edit out the church bells. But nevertheless, it's a really good conversation around paternity leave, shared parental leave, and the ongoing efforts to improve the system. I think you'll enjoy it. Delighted to be joined today by Jeremy Davies of the Fatherhood Institute. Jeremy, do you just want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah. So I'm Jeremy Davies. I'm Deputy Chief Exec and Head of Impact at the Fatherhood Institute.
We've been talking today about paternity leave, paternity pay, and parental leave in general. And it's quite timely, I think, that we're speaking to you this week because the Employment Rights Bill that has been going through Parliament, it's been announced that it looks like paternity leave is going to become a day one right for all fathers. But yet paternity pay is not going to be, and the rule that you still need to have worked for the same organisation for 9 months is going to apply. So I just wondered if, to start with, you could give us a bit of context around what we're expecting perhaps from the bill, if we thought anything was going to change, what the current situation looks like it, and also the work that you've been doing, I think, with some members of the Lords to look at an amendment to the bill.
Yeah, so the Employment Rights Bill is currently in the House of Lords, and we've been doing some work with Baroness Lister to bring an amendment which is not actually specifically focused on the issue of paternity pay. It's much broader than that. It's basically what is apparently called a probing amendment. So it's an amendment that is aimed not really at changing the bill, but it's aimed at prompting a response from ministers to the substance of what's proposed in the amendment. And so what we've focused that on is to try and pin down detail from the government at this point about what it plans to look at in the parental leave review, which we know is coming. We know it's supposed to be starting this summer. We know it's going to last for about a year. But at this stage, we don't know much more than that. And we at the Institute think it's really important that that bill has the right scope. And that scope should include looking at international models of parenting leave design. It should consider seriously the idea of reserved, non-transferable leave, parental leave for fathers. It should look at the whole issue of pay, both in terms of paternity leave and any other forms of leave that might arise following the review. And we also want it to be clear that the review will consider including self-employed dads and others not currently eligible. But in the process of drafting that amendment and doing some background research for that, some time ago, it occurred to me that I hadn't seen paternity pay mentioned in any of the documents I'd seen about the Employment Rights Bill. I'd mentioned that in various different fora. Nobody else had particularly picked up on it. And I thought, well, I kind of need to get to the bottom of whether that's included or not in the bill. So we checked with the relevant government department and they confirmed that indeed it's not included. And so we're in this kind of crazy situation of the government widening the eligibility for paternity leave by saying, you no longer need to have worked for your employer for 6 months to be eligible to apply to take leave, but you apply 15 weeks before the due date. So that's basically 9 months. So they're widening paternity leave by removing that requirement, but the same doesn't happen for pay. So dads who haven't worked for their employer for as long as that will be able to take the leave, but they won't be able to get the pay, which kind of is crazy, especially given the mountains of evidence that affordability is a huge barrier to dads taking paternity leave. So it just doesn't make sense. So,
Jeremy, just to follow up on that, it could be a good point there just to explain the difference between paternity pay, paternity leave, parental leave. There's a lot of terminology when it comes to becoming a parent and
there is.
eligibility. Can you explain the difference quickly between the two? And also, if possible, give some context as to why how we've managed to get to a scenario where pay and leave are being separated out rather than happening at the same time.
So paternity leave comes from the same stable, if you like, as maternity leave. When I'm talking here, I'm talking internationally. So the UK is a bit weird in the way it does all of this stuff. So if I tell you how things work, more widely, I think that helps illustrate the point. So in most of Europe, for example, there is an understanding that maternity and paternity leave serve a particular function, and that is, in the mother's case, to provide time for her to recover from the birth, establish breastfeeding, and so on. Sometimes maternity leave is talked about as a kind of health and safety leave. So it's about that as opposed to looking after babies. Right. Paternity leave comes from that same stable. It's about giving fathers some time to support the mother's recovery. And in lots of European countries, that distinction is very clearly defined in the way the policy frameworks are set up. The other type of leave is called parental leave, and that is leave for parents to spend time looking after their baby. And what often happens, again, in some of the best international parenting leave models, what you will see is a combination of different types of parental leave. So you can have parental leave that is reserved for the mother, and so she either takes it or she doesn't. She can't transfer it to the father. Then the equivalent for fathers, so reserved parental leave for a father. Again, if he doesn't take it, it's going nowhere. It doesn't get used. He can't hand it over to her. And then often there's a period of parental leave that could be used by either. So the Scandinavian models of parental leave tend to be built around blocks of reserved parental leave for either parent. Some of the really good international models have no paternity leave, but they do have reserved parental leave. So what we're looking at when we look at the international models is there's a clear policy goal in mind when these models are designed, tweaked, improved, and monitored. So the policy goal with maternity and paternity leave is to make sure that mothers are have the time and space to look after themselves and get over the stresses and so on of having just had a baby. And they have time to establish breastfeeding and so on. And the paternity leave bit is there to make sure that the dad can help her with that. But then the parental leave models are designed usually with the policy goal of achieving improvements in gender equality. So we know the evidence is very clear that if you give fathers a period of well-paid, reserved parental leave, first of all, they'll take it. And second, that has an impact on the mother's ability to go back to work. She can get back to work more quickly. She has more confidence in the father as a caregiver and is therefore much more willing to consider going back to work earlier.
We talked about the fact that leave and pay has been uncoupled, and we know from lots of research that's out there that even with statutory paternity pay, when some fathers are entitled to it, that it's still a barrier to them taking leave because they can't afford to take it at that level.
Yeah.
I suppose the other
Yeah.
just a reflection on the 26-15 rule, in the sense that you've got to be working somewhere for 26 weeks, 15 weeks prior to the baby being born to be eligible. At a previous job, I think I snuck into that when we were expecting my son by a couple of days. So I was nearly frustrated by that. But then you talked about international comparisons. When I was writing my master's dissertation, I referenced some of your work, and specifically the fact that actually when you compare the UK to a lot of other OECD countries, our system is one of the most unequal in the world. I think it was out of 41 countries, we were ranked 40th, or maybe a little bit more than that. But the only countries below us were Israel, New Zealand, and US. And that's because in that particular data point, I think we provide 0.4 weeks of equivalent full-time pay, and all of those provided absolutely zero. So actually, out of the countries that do pay anything in the OECD, we are actually the worst.
Yeah, that's right. 40th out of 43. We're also the worst in Europe. We've also got the biggest gap between mothers and fathers' entitlements. You know, the basic kind of structure of our leave system is the mothers have a right to 52 weeks leave and the fathers have a right to 2. That is the biggest gap. And going back to what I was saying about, you know, the international models and how, you know, the best ones, there is a very clear policy goal that guides the design of the system. One has to ask oneself, what is the policy goal guiding that 52 versus 2 week gap? Because it certainly isn't gender equality.
Do you have a preferred model? And by that I mean, is there a model which seems to have the best outcomes? Because you get lots of talk about if you increase pay, you sometimes get a boom of uptake, but then it tailors off in terms of the output of the policy. But what's the most successful policies, and is there a version you would want to see us replicate in the UK?
Not just me, but ask academics who spend their lives thinking about this stuff to name the best systems. The Scandinavian models would be mentioned the most. Iceland is probably the top of the table, and that's partly because of the design of the leave system, and it's a small, you know, relatively wealthy country. Their gender equality indicators are usually the best in the world, or certainly in the top 3. And in terms of the father's use of parental leave is very high. I can't remember the exact figures, but I think it's something like 92% of mothers use parental leave, and something like 78 or 79% of fathers. I mean, that's way higher than most countries. And of course, it's very difficult to make these international comparisons because the systems are very different, and sometimes the data you can get differs greatly. So even on something that sounds straightforward, like take up of leave, that's not straightforward to measure. In the UK, for example, how do we measure how many fathers use how many fathers take leave when their babies are born? We don't really know. So what we do know is we can look at data from HMRC about how the extent to which companies are claiming back statutory paternity pay. That's the best measure we've got of the financial cost of this, and the, you know, the extent to which statutory paternity pay claims are made. And when you look at it that way, our take-up rate for statutory paternity leave is just over 30%. Now, that doesn't mean that only 30% of fathers are taking leave when their babies are born, because we know that fathers are using all sorts of other ways of taking time off. You know, they're taking holiday. Some of them will be receiving enhanced pay from their employer. And we suspect, although we don't have great data about this, that quite a few employers don't bother to claim back the statutory pay, which tells you something about the level at which it's paid, of course. So it is difficult to compare, but I think it's fair to say the best in the world are the Scandinavian models, and they are broadly based on periods of reserved leave for each parent and reserved parental leave.
I believe in
And
your
they
other
don't.
work you've called it a daddy month, haven't you? They have a daddy month in there,
Yes, yes.
and of the reserved, and then you have periods of transferable. Is transferable leave or shared parental leave better? And is what is actually the difference? Because I've read a lot
Well,
about shared parental
okay.
leave and Paul knows this, but it hasn't worked very well in the UK.
No, it
So
hasn't.
can you talk us through the differences and why it's kind of, in your opinion?
And the first thing to say is that we describe shared parental leave as a misnomer because it's a misappropriation of the term parental leave. And also the use of the word shared suggests that it's fully equal, where the mother and father has an equal choice in whether they're going to take it or not. So all three of those words are wrong in our view, to describe what that is. The correct terminology should be transferable maternity leave, because basically what the shared parental leave scheme, as it's called, is a way for the mother. So the mother owns, in inverted commas, her maternity leave, which, as we've already discussed, stretches to 52 weeks, albeit most of it paid at an unaffordable rate or unpaid. So she owns that leave and can choose to transfer as much of that as she wants. It's not, she can't transfer all of it. She has to take 2 weeks maternity leave at the start. So the basic design is wrong in that it's transferable maternity leave in the first place. And then, yes, there are all sorts of other problems with it. One being that the the employer doesn't have to match what they offer in maternity leave. They don't have to match that in their shared parental leave offer. So what happens when the mother transfers leave to the father is that basically she opts to jump off the maternity leave track and onto the shared parental leave track instead. That then enables her to share a proportion of that leave with the father. So that shared parental leave track for her doesn't need to match whatever she would get on maternity leave from her employer. So that's one problem. Then the other problem is the father receiving her maternity leave in the form of shared parental leave. There's nothing to specify that his employer needs to match again what they would offer a mother on maternity leave. So in lots of cases they don't offer as much as they would on maternity leave. So that's another problem.
Yeah, I
Well,
think it's
he can't take that.
yeah, I think it's safe to say that shared parental leave hasn't been an overwhelming success. There was a study in that showed that in the years up to 2019, and obviously it was introduced in 2015, that shared parental leave did not lead to increased take up or length of leave amongst fathers. Research from the CIPD in 2022 showed 85% of their members reporting no new fathers took up the offer of shared parental leave in the previous 2 years. And then the government's own evaluation of shared parental leave in 2023 suggested that nearly half of fathers didn't know the leave existed, and that only 5% of fathers and 1% of mothers reported taking it up. So, not an
Okay.
overwhelming success.
So, Jamie, you have a campaign running at the moment. So, um, the 6 weeks for dads is just run us through why it's 6 weeks for dads, what the kind of thinking behind that is, and what it's aiming to change.
We're calling for 6 weeks well-paid leave for all fathers. So that includes self-employed dads and others who are currently not eligible. With the 6 weeks made up of 2 weeks paternity and a daddy month of reserved parental leave for fathers, and all of that to be taken in the first year of the baby's life. The reason we've gone for that model, and I should say this, this is not our perfect model. This is what we would consider a step in the right direction. So we felt that, campaigning for something like the Icelandic model would get us nowhere, basically, because the screams would come up about about the cost of it, costs of business, etc., etc., etc. Because we've got such a badly designed and poorly funded system right now, we felt we had to come up with a model that felt like it came from the real world. Crucial to our thinking is the daddy month, as I've already explained. And I suppose what our thinking is that if we could get this model in, then this government, future governments, could look at the take-up rates, measure the impact of this, and hopefully over time add additional daddy months and mummy months to restructure the overall system and get us out of this crazy kind of 52 weeks versus 2 weeks model that we've got right now. The 6 weeks works neatly, I suppose, in terms of equity, in the sense that fathers to receive 6 weeks at 90% of pay, which is exactly the same as what mothers get. So although our model isn't like a fully equal model like in some of the Scandinavian countries, there is a very clear level of equality to it that we hope would inspire change and inspire a kind of shift in thinking about this stuff. Because at the end of the day, what needs to happen is we need the statutory system to be better designed. And what that then does is it starts to shape the culture. Parents are parents, and they need time, and we can't operate on the basis that when a young woman comes along for a job, we're looking at her differently from how we're looking at the young man, because we're looking at her thinking, okay, when's she gonna go off and have babies, and she's going to be costly because she could take a year off, and he's going to be what the sociologists would call an ideal worker, i.e., he's going to work as many hours as we want him to. He's not going to be tied down by looking after his kids, etc., etc. It seems to me this part of the equation doesn't get talked about half enough. It's really obvious that women are at a disadvantage in the workplace. And what are we doing about it? At the moment, what we're doing is we're bolstering that by giving them a whole bunch of leave, which incidentally is not well paid. This is not how to achieve gender equality at all.
No.
And tweaking the system, which is what we've had so far from the government, is not going to solve any of this either. These systems need to have a bit more ambition to them.
Yeah. We know that nothing's going to change immediately in this employment rights bill. And there's obviously the review that is going to probably take around a year. How hopeful are you that we'll see some progress and some change? Say if we were here in the next 5 years, do you think that the leave system will look fundamentally different? Or do you fear that actually we'll still be stuck in the same place that we are right now?
Gosh, that's $1 million question. Honestly, I don't know. Really, I don't. And I think part of the reason I don't is that we are at a stage with this where all we are hearing and all we have heard since Labour got in is, we are making things better with the Employment Rights Bill and we are going to hold a parental leave review. So given that that's the case, we've really got nothing. We've got nothing positive to hang our hats on yet. And in a sense, that's really what our amendment, trying to pin down what that parental leave review is going to cover, is all about. So yeah, I honestly don't know. I mean, there are encouraging signs, I would say, in the sense that this time around, it's not just us, the Fatherhood Institute, talking about this. The Dad Shift are doing a great job of campaigning for a better deal. Joseph Rowntree Foundation this week have published a new modelling of the costs and benefits of a 6 weeks model. And, I think it's important to emphasize that this is not just about being nice to dads. There are all sorts of outcomes that improve, and those include economic outputs, greater productivity and all sorts of things that one would think governments would be motivated by.
We'll have to have you on again at some point because we haven't covered half the stuff me and Chris thought that we would do. So, but it's been really good to actually deep dive into this one really important subject. Before we let you go, we ask everyone who comes on the same question at the end, which is that parenting and being a dad doesn't come with a manual. If you were invited to write a chapter of such a manual, what would your chapter be on?
Oh, well, I can speak from my own personal experience on this, I guess. So my son is 25 right now, and I feel like there's a bit of a gap in the market for parenting advice for parents of children beyond adolescence, because there's still a lot going on at that point. And I feel like you read a lot these days about kids who are still living at home in their 20s and so on. And I'm not sure what sources of advice those parents, or indeed the children, are drawing on for how to make those relationships work. But I know for sure that there are challenges to that. So yeah, maybe that's a chapter, or maybe it's a book.
I mean,
I don't know.
That's a really interesting answer. And yeah, I mean, my mum's always saying that it never ends. Like even when your children are adults, it's just,
well, it
it's
doesn't. It
something
just
different.
changes. It just becomes different. Even if you see them less, talk to them less, or maybe you don't actually if they're living in your house. Even if on some level they're an independent adult, they're still your child and you're still their dad. What does that mean? What does it look like? What are you supposed to do? There's a lot to think about.
That would be a good chapter, particularly as then you've got the one after it naturally be is what you do when you become the grandparent there and how that works, and then
Whole
what
other question.
Whole other question, whole other podcast.
Great. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you.
And that's our show for today. Father Z is produced by Gemma Lothian, Chris Marchant and Paul Rhodes. It's edited by Paul Rhodes. Our music is by Christos Politis. You can find information, guidance and support on our website, fathercraft.co.uk. That's also where you can sign up to our Father Z platform, read our blog and find product reviews. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and leave us a 5-star rating so other dads can find us. It really does help. Thanks for listening.